You gotta fight for your right to party.
On April 14th, 2012, the Beastie Boys, the innovative hip-hop trio that blended rap with punk and rock to create a boundary-pushing sound laden with clever, irreverent rhymes, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The honor was a long time coming for the Beastie Boys, who had helped define the sound of hip-hop in the 80s and 90s with their genre-bending style. Their debut album, Licensed to Ill, was a groundbreaking commercial success in 1986, becoming the first ever rap album to top the Billboard charts, and in time it became one of the best-selling albums of all time. Over the next 2 decades, the Beastie Boys continued to release innovative albums that challenged conventions and earned critical acclaim, including Paul's Boutique, Ill Communication, and Hello Nasty, marking them as true pioneers. Despite their commercial success and cultural impact, the Hall of Fame's recognition came nearly 25 years after their first album, a testament to both the band's longevity and the Hall's reputation for its slow acknowledgement of genre-defying acts. When the induction finally happened in 2012, it was a moment of celebration for fans and the group, affirming the Beastie Boys' status as one of the most influential acts of its time. But the celebration of the band's accomplishments that night was bittersweet. Adam Yauch, known throughout the music world by his stage name MCA, who was the musical and emotional heart of the Beastie Boys, as well as its creative engine and the driving force behind its shift to the rap-rock style that would become its trademark, was too ill to attend. His bandmates read an uplifting statement Yauch prepared in which he thanked those who helped and inspired the band, and fellow musicians and admirers such as Chuck D and LL Cool J paid tribute to Yauch's lasting impact on music and culture. But there was a pall of sadness over the ceremony, because so many in attendance knew that the end was near for MCA. Yauch had been diagnosed with salivary gland cancer in 2009, which he announced publicly in a video message to fans with his characteristic mix of solemnity tinged with a playful lightheartedness. He acknowledged he faced many challenges ahead, but maintained a hopeful outlook, saying, quote, "This is something that's very treatable, and in most cases, they're able to completely get rid of it. I'm hoping to be cancer-free soon." Yauch underwent surgery and radiation therapy, while also exploring alternative treatments like Tibetan medicine. For the next 3 years, Yauch devoted himself to his battle against cancer while continuing to be a creative force behind the Beastie Boys. His diagnosis came just before the release of the album Hot Sauce Committee Part 2, delaying its launch. But when the album finally dropped in 2011, it was met with widespread acclaim, and Yauch's contributions were praised despite his health struggles. However, due to his illness, Yauch was unable to join his bandmates for live performances. Yauch's Buddhist faith gave him a deep sense of peace in his final years. He was vocal about his spirituality, which had led him to advocate for Tibetan independence and other humanitarian causes. Yauch saw his battle with cancer as part of life's journey, saying, quote, "Everything I've been through, all the work, the music, the activism, it's all connected. It's all part of the same path." On the morning of May 4th, 2012, with his wife and young daughter by his side, he passed away at his home in New York City. Adam MCA Yauch was 47 years old. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, Adam Yauch.
The tributes to Yauch poured in from some of the biggest names in music, with artists across genres expressing their admiration for his talent and the profound impact he left behind. Fellow rappers and musicians, including Run DMC's Rev Run and Chuck D of Public Enemy, spoke not only of the tragic loss of such an influential figure, but also of Yauch's transformative contributions to both music and social causes. Rev Run, who had toured with the Beastie Boys during their early years, wrote that Yauch was, quote, "a true pioneer, a visionary who pushed boundaries, blending punk, rock, and rap into something that changed the game forever. He wasn't just an incredible rapper, he was an artist, an activist, someone who used his platform to spread a message of peace." Chuck D, whose work with Public Enemy paralleled the political messages Yauch later embraced, referred to him as, quote, "the heart of the Beastie Boys, both musically and spiritually. He was always pushing for something deeper and used his fame for good. He helped people wake up." Bono from U2, who Yauch admired throughout his life for passionate involvement in social justice initiatives, praised Yauch's activism, saying, quote, "Adam was an artist who believed in more than just music. He believed in humanity. He turned his creative energy into something bigger, fighting for Tibet, for human rights, for the idea that we all need to come together." These tributes from across the musical and activist communities highlighted not just Yauch's talent, but his ability to fuse creativity with compassion, leaving behind a legacy far greater than the music alone.
The early success of the Beastie Boys surprised everyone, and no one more than the members of the band themselves. Yauch, along with Michael Mike D. Diamond and Adam Ad Rock Horowitz, were just three middle-class Jewish kids who didn't do particularly well in school and bonded over their shared love of hardcore music. When they started playing together, it was exclusively punk and acid rock, experimenting with metal influences and fast-paced, aggressive sounds that suited their teenage energy. In high school, they began to play small gigs around New York City, building a small but loyal following with songs featuring thrashing guitars and raw vocals common in the New York punk scene. But as they spent more time in New York's music underground, they began to incorporate hip-hop beats and rap lyrics into their sound, initially just as a creative experiment. In 1983, they released a single called Cookie Puss that was an experimental mix of punk with rap, which surprised everyone when it sold relatively well and they realized they might be onto something. The next year, they met producer Rick Rubin, who was already becoming famous for fusing hip-hop with other genres of music, and he knew the Beastie Boys might be something special. He said, quote, "The Beastie Boys were like no one else, with their wild mix of punk rock attitude and hip-hop bravado that was just so raw. As soon as I met them, I knew if they could harness what they had, they could make something that would blow people's minds." And that's exactly what they did. The 1986 release of License to Ill electrified the music world and immediately established the Beastie Boys as one of the most groundbreaking acts of the decade. The album was the first hip-hop record to top the Billboard 200 chart, making history as the Beastie Boys brought rap into the mainstream in a way that no one had anticipated. The lyrics were humorous, irreverent, and filled with the kind of youthful energy that resonated with a wide audience. From the explosive guitar riffs in No Sleep Till Brooklyn to the tongue-in-cheek defiance of Fight for Your Right, License to Ill turned the Beastie Boys into superstars almost overnight.
Jason, I wanted to talk about the Beastie Boys' rise from the punk scene and then incorporating the hip-hop beats with Rick Rubin. You know, we live in a current era where everyone talks about cultural appropriation. It really wasn't the conversation surrounding the Beastie Boys' rise. What was interesting is how quickly they were adopted into the fold of the mainstream rap that was going on, even though their messaging, and I think because their messaging wasn't loaded with social justice messages, it wasn't sort of important what life is like on the streets. It was like these guys like to party and they like to rap over beats. And I think that's what made them accepted. They weren't sort of trying to say, we came from a tough upbringing. They were just saying, we love this music.
Yeah, I can tell you sort of from the perspective of the white suburbanite like I was, it was Run DMC with Walk This Way combining with Aerosmith that really introduced people like me to rap early on. You then had this couple of year period that was dominated by non-rappers. You got the Princes and Madonnas of the world. And all of a sudden in 86, the Beastie Boys come along and they stand on the shoulders of Run DMC. They gave Run DMC all the credit in the world. Rev Run was a huge fan and supporter of the Beastie Boys.
They never said they invented rap or anything like it.
They didn't.
They popularized
to the contrary, they always gave credit to those who came before. But for white suburbanites, the Beastie Boys came along and all of a sudden hip-hop was a genre that was insanely popular. And from there, you get into the late 80s, you get to NWA and it takes over. But this was an introduction. Again, it was Run DMC and then the Beastie Boys made it huge in the communities, in many American communities.
They really were an entry point for the explosion of the genre for a lot of people. And Yauch was the creative engine of the band, and he encouraged the trio to embody, quote, the bad boy image that matched the themes of License to Ill, and the Beastie Boys soon became synonymous with a loud, unapologetic attitude. The trio embraced the wild, hedonistic lifestyle of rock stars as they continued to infuse their rap with punk energy and defiance. Their hit song Brass Monkey reflected this persona, glorifying partying, mischief, and youthful excess, positioning them as the ultimate bad boys of the rap world at that time. But perhaps no song captured the band's rebellious nature like the defiant and anarchic, but undeniably catchy, Paul Revere, which told the fictional story of the trio's first meeting as Wild West outlaws wreaking havoc across the desert.
Now, here's a little story I got to tell about three bad brothers you know so well. It started way back in history with that rap
MCA
and me.
Mike D.
Been had a little horsey named Paul Revere. Just me and my horsey and a quart of beer. Riding across the land, kicking up sand, sharing spices on my tail.
There are a couple fun facts about the song Paul Revere.
It's still a banger. I have to say, when you hear it, it's one of those like timeless classics.
It's actually something I learned. It is loosely based on the iconic Longfellow poem, Paul Revere's Ride, you know, the one if by land, two if by sea that we all learn as kids. And it's sung in the same meter as the poem, and both begin with a call to the audience to listen to what's to come. The second thing is, this has been my go-to karaoke song since I was 15 years old. If you ask my wife or my kids or any of my friends, what does Jason sing at karaoke? It is Paul Revere.
We got to have you drop bars at the TMZ holiday
so
party.
I thought we have about 10 minutes left in this podcast. No, but I would love to. I would love to entertain you guys with Paul Revere at some point.
Yeah,
I've got it. I've got it. Every lyric, every beat. I have it all.
Oh, we're gonna hear it. One episode, we're just gonna run it straight through. You doing all of Paul Revere. But what I love about that song is it is sort of an homage to that poem, but they weren't esoteric. These guys weren't like pretentious about it. It was a poem you learned as a kid, and there was always a very childlike, energetic quality of defiance to them. But Adam Yauch was a brilliant guy.
Well, and you're seeing that in the homage to Longfellow. He didn't tell anybody about this, but this is Adam Yauch's idea, right? He's the one that he was the intellectual of the group. Every group, right, has the intellectual. He was it. And he's the one that brought this kind of sensibility to the band. And we'll see this later on with how the band transforms, its music transforms. It was all under Adam Yauch's creative sort of influences, and you're seeing the beginning of that here. After the success of License to Ill, the group, at Yauch's urging, began a slow migration away from the purely rebellious and wild side that had defined them, incorporating more nuanced sounds, socially conscious messages, and self-reflective lyrics. Starting with their 1992 album, Check Your Head, the band shifted to a more mature, eclectic sound while still maintaining the raw energy that defined their earlier work, exemplified by the album's huge single, Jimmy James, their tribute to Jimi Hendrix. The band's change of direction corresponded with Yauch's personal transformation that was marked by a deep spiritual awakening. He had always been the more introspective and socially conscious member of the group, but his growing interest in Tibetan Buddhism after a trip to Nepal and India in 1992 deepened his commitment to mindfulness, compassion, and activism. This spiritual awakening had an immediate and noticeable impact on the band's creative direction. As Yauch became more involved in Tibetan freedom efforts and Eastern philosophy, his personal transformation began to seep into the music he created with the Beastie Boys.
The impact of Yauch's Buddhist beliefs were first fully realized on the Beastie Boys' 1994 album, Ill Communication, featuring tracks like Bodhisattva Vow, where Yauch explicitly expressed his spiritual path, weaving Buddhist principles of compassion and enlightenment into the lyrics. The song was a striking departure from the brash, party-fueled anthems of their earlier work. This change wasn't just lyrical. The music itself reflected a broader range of influences and a more thoughtful, experimental approach. The use of live instruments and the incorporation of elements like funk, jazz, and traditional Eastern sounds demonstrated the band's evolution, mirroring Yauch's deepening spirituality. While they never lost their playful energy, the Beastie Boys became more conscious and reflective, dealing with larger societal issues and promoting peace and understanding. Yauch's involvement in the Tibetan freedom concerts and activism on behalf of human rights became key components of his legacy, shaping both the Beastie Boys' public persona and their artistic output for years to come.
It's always dangerous to compare anybody to the Beatles, right?
But here you go.
Because this is, you're seeing the same thing. I would never compare them, their musical brilliance, nothing like that.
I like the analogy, though.
But you're seeing the exact same thing, right? He takes this trip, just like the Beatles had gone to India, especially. George Harrison was deeply influenced by...
Ravi Shankar came into their music and so forth.
So Yauch goes to India and Nepal in 92, and he comes back and he says, look, this is a new direction I think we can take this band in. You saw the same thing with the guy from Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey Buckingham. Lindsey Buckingham does the same thing. He comes back and they create Tusk, which actually fractured the band. George Harrison comes back, created a lot of problems in the band. Adam Yauch comes back from India and Nepal with a whole new direction. It doesn't seem there was any fracturing. The band sort of seamlessly moved into a very different stage in their lives.
Yeah, you can see this happen with a lot of bands. I think the reason is they were very, very successful. All their anthems were party anthems. Yes. You know, they were fighting for your right to party. Brass Monkey is a song about
alcohol.
An alcoholic beverage.
Right.
And then you have so much success early on, and it sort of feels empty. I think people then go to places like India and Nepal. They discover Buddhism, and it's appealing because it gives life meaning when you've had all of this success early on. The Beatles, I think that was part of the motivation as well. But it's interesting is that it always impacts the music. It's you can't compartmentalize. The Beatles were impacted by their trip to India, and the Beastie Boys' music did change. They can never say, we can't go back to singing about our right to party. We're older now. We're in our 30s.
What makes the Beatles, of course, is they come back and create maybe the greatest music ever produced in the history of the world, right? They come back and they have Sgt. Pepper's and they have the White Album, often regarded as their best material ever. The Beastie Boys never reached the heights of License to Ill, but from a critical perspective, honestly, License to Ill was not a critical darling. It was commercially huge, hugely successful. But they came back and they created albums that maybe didn't sell quite as well, but were critically acclaimed. They got a deeper sense of the music and the musicality that came from that trip. And
you're right, but to your point, the Beatles sort of pulled it off. And
Right.
What happened with the Beastie Boys, a lot of their fans didn't want anything other than party anthems from these rowdy group of boys. The way they rapped was so influential that to see them depart from that was a disappointment to some people. Even though Yauch, to his credit, said, "Look, I've grown as an artist, and I'm going to move the direction of this band. We shouldn't be stagnant."
Yeah, it really had that same similar effect on the creative evolution of the Beastie Boys, with positive lyrics as opposed to the negative sort of partying lyrics, an incorporation of non-traditional instruments while still staying true to the rap roots. Here's a song called Sure Shot from their album Ill Communication, in which the band incorporates a pan flute behind their rap beats to sing about the need to show greater respect to women and girls. Quite a departure from their earlier stuff.
And throughout the late 90s, as Yauch's creative direction took hold, the Beastie Boys continued to grow and succeed, both musically and personally. Their 1998 album, Hello Nasty, was the culmination of their transformation. It retained the playful, inventive spirit that had always defined the group, but Yauch's spiritual focus and activism were also on full display. The album was an enormous critical success, earning the band 2 Grammys. And Jason, this was really my entry point. I remember the song Intergalactic was incredible. It had this amazing video. It sort of merged his new interest with the old Beastie Boys sound, and to great success.
It was so important for their legacy because we talked about it earlier, they were really regarded in many corners as a novelty act before that. And Fight for Your Right is a novelty song. I loved it, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a novelty song. Paul revered the same sort of way. But here you have a totally different type of music, and it is critically praised, and they win the Grammys. And I think when people look back on the Beastie Boys and you take it in full, it wasn't just that they found this sweet spot with the mix of hip hop and rock back in the day. They were able to transform themselves and really remain relevant and critically, at least, incredibly successful.
What's also amazing to me is this is the height. 1998 is the height of basically gangster rap.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Biggie and Tupac around this time, and they were different. They were doing something different, but they were also accepted. It was sort of parallel tracks. You could listen to the Beastie Boys, you didn't lose any credibility. They were just doing something different and getting rewarded for it, even though mainstream music had shifted away from their sound. I always thought that was really cool that they stuck to their guns and how they wanted to sound. After the tremendous commercial and critical success of Hello Nasty, Yauch shifted much of his focus away from the music to devote himself to Tibetan freedom and social activism. His commitment to human rights issues deepened, and he poured his energy into the Tibetan freedom concerts and the work of his organization, the Milarepa Fund, which he had established to support Tibetan independence. These large-scale concerts, featuring some of the biggest names in music, became a central focus in Yauch's life. With Yauch's attention directed toward activism, the Beastie Boys' live performances and musical output slowed considerably. While the band continued working together and sharing ideas, they were no longer on the relentless release schedule that had characterized their earlier years. Instead, they took a more introspective approach, releasing fewer records and spending more time refining their creative direction. Yauch's activism and dedication to the Tibetan cause influenced the band's ethos, and though they would eventually release more music, it was with a tone shaped by the social consciousness Yauch had cultivated during this time. And despite all this, the musical and spiritual transformations and the band members' varying interests, the three remained exceptionally close and remained remarkably productive, all things considered. Even after Yauch's 2009 cancer diagnosis, he continued to contribute to the creative work of the Beastie Boys and stayed active with his social causes for as long as his health allowed. Initially, Yauch approached his illness with a fighter's spirit, undergoing treatments and even expressing optimism that he would recover. But as time passed, the effects of Yauch's illness began to take a toll on his ability to participate fully in the band's activities. His distinctive presence in the studio and on stage began to fade, and the Beastie Boys canceled tour plans as his health deteriorated.
Yauch maintained his perspective and accepted his fate. He saw the illness as part of life's natural course and spoke openly about finding comfort in his faith during this difficult time. He spoke of his, quote, interconnectedness with the world around him and his belief in the impermanence of all things. Upon his death, so many people said wonderful things about Adam Yauch, remembering the career that he'd had. But the final word goes to Yauch's lifelong friends and Beastie Boys bandmates, Mike Diamond and Adam Horvitz, who wrote, quote, "We are devastated by the loss of our friend and brother, Adam Yauch. He was a creative force, a passionate advocate for change, and a loving friend. Adam was someone who approached life with kindness, compassion, and a deep understanding of what truly mattered. Adam helped redefine the landscape of music, blending genres and breaking boundaries. His contributions went beyond music. He inspired us and so many others to stand for what we believe in and to support those in need. We will cherish the memories we shared and honor his legacy by continuing to promote the values he held dear. His spirit and creativity will live on in our hearts and in the music he helped create. Thank you, Adam, for everything. We miss you dearly.